October 30th, 1901. On the windswept plains of the Transvaal, a British column, the most successful of the war, is caught in a blinding hailstorm. They think they're pursuing a beaten enemy. They're dead wrong. They're walking straight into a perfectly laid trap. This wasn't supposed to be a real war anymore. But in its brutal guerrilla phase, one battle would demonstrate the lethal effectiveness of the Boer commandos and send a shockwave through the British Empire. This is the story of the Battle of Bakenlaagte and how a devastating ambush shattered the myth of British invincibility. By late 1901, the Second Anglo-Boer War had become a totally different kind of conflict. The first phase of set-piece battles was over. The British Empire, with its bottomless resources, had captured the Boer capitals and declared victory. To the generals in London, the war was won. Lord Roberts, the commander-in-chief, had already gone home, announcing that all organized resistance had ended. Out on the vast, open veld of South Africa, the war entered its most desperate and destructive stage. Refusing to surrender, the Boers switched to the one kind of warfare where they had the upper hand, guerrilla combat. Led by brilliant, ghost-like commanders like Christian de Wet and Louis Botha, small, highly mobile units of mounted riflemen waged a relentless campaign of hit-and-run attacks. They ambushed patrols, harried supply lines, and vanished back into a countryside they knew better than anyone. For the British, it was like fighting ghosts. In response, the new British commander-in-chief, Lord Kitchener, unleashed a brutal counterinsurgency strategy. First, a scorched earth policy to deny the guerrillas any support. British troops burned farms, destroyed crops, and confiscated livestock. The second, more infamous part, was the creation of concentration camps, where tens of thousands of Boer civilians, mostly women and children, were interned. To hunt the commandos themselves, Kitchener created a new weapon, the flying column. These were mobile forces of mounted infantry, artillery, and wagons designed to track down Boer camps, or loggers. They were the hunters in this new war, and among them, one column and its commander were the most feared and successful of all. Lieutenant Colonel George Benson and his number, 3 Flying Column. George Benson was one of the most energetic officers in the British Army. He'd caught Kitchener's eye during the campaign to recapture Khartoum in 1898 and had proven himself a clever and bold commander. Kitchener gave him a column in May 1901, and Benson quickly proved him right. Benson's method was terrifyingly effective. His column of about 2,000 men was a lethal instrument, made up of elite units. At the heart of his success was an exceptional intelligence network run by Colonel Wools Sampson. Using African scouts, they'd pinpoint a Boer logger. Then, under the cover of darkness, Benson would lead his troops on punishing night rides, sometimes covering 80 kilometers to crash into the Boer camp at dawn and create total chaos. The pace was so furious that his men suffered more casualties from falls than from Boer bullets. The Boers called him the Mad Englishman, and it was said they wouldn't knowingly sleep within 30 miles of his column. His success was undeniable. In just a few months, Benson's column had inflicted heavy losses on the Boers, capturing hundreds of fighters, wagons, and livestock. In mid-October 1901, Benson moved his column deep into the eastern Transvaal, a hornet's nest of Boer activity. He was confident. He was the hunter. But this time, the hunted were waiting for him, and they were led by the Commandant General of the Transvaal forces himself, Louis Botha. Botha was a formidable figure. A farmer and politician before the war, he had risen to become a tactical genius. After a daring raid into Natal, he returned to the eastern Transvaal to find his people in a desperate state. Kitchener's policies were taking a terrible toll, but for Botha, the war wasn't over. He saw that Benson's column, operating so far from its base, was isolated and vulnerable. He knew he needed to strike a decisive blow, not just to eliminate Benson, but to restore the morale of his weary fighters. The opportunity was rare, and Botha seized it. In a remarkable feat for a guerrilla army, he began to gather his forces. Using heliographs, mirrors that flashed sunlight to send signals, he contacted his subordinate generals, including Johann Grobler, Cohen Britz, and Piet Viljoen, ordering them to converge. Over 1,200 men began to move. The trap was being set. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The morning of October 30th, 1901 was gray and miserable. Benson's column was on the move, but from the very start, they were harried by Boer snipers, forcing the column to stretch out. A fatal mistake. Then, the weather turned. A cold, driving rain became a blinding hailstorm, turning the veld into a sodden mire. Heavy supply wagons got bogged down, slowing the rearguard to a crawl and opening a deadly gap between it and the main body of the column. This was the moment the Boers were waiting for. Commanding the rearguard was Major Anley. His force of mounted infantry, Scottish horse, and artillery was supposed to protect the column's vulnerable tail. And then, the trap was sprung. Hidden by the appalling weather, Louis Botha had gathered nearly 900 horsemen. This wasn't a small sniping party. It was a large, organized force. Botha gave the order. What followed was the classic Boer tactic, executed with terrifying perfection. A swarm of Boer riders appeared as if from nowhere and charged at a full gallop, their line stretching almost 2 kilometers to envelop the British rearguard. The shock was immediate. British troopers were caught in a murderous crossfire. The sheer speed of the charge overwhelmed their positions. Men of the East Kent Regiment were simply overrun by the tide of horsemen. Colonel Benson, hearing the storm of gunfire from his rear, knew this was a major attack. He and his men galloped back towards the sound, racing for a low, rocky ridge that would become known as Gun Hill. It was there that the remnants of his shattered rearguard were making their last stand. The 2 field guns of the 84th Battery were unlimbered on the ridge, and a desperate defensive line of about 210 men formed around them. Their orders were simple and grim: hold the ridge, save the guns. But the Boer charge didn't stop. They galloped to within a few hundred yards, dismounted, and advanced on foot, using every scrap of cover as their Mauser rifles spat a continuous, accurate fire. The air was a deafening roar of rifle cracks, whistling bullets, and the screams of wounded men and horses. The fighting on Gun Hill was brutal and at point-blank range. Outnumbered nearly 4-1, the British defenders fought with desperate courage, but were being systematically cut to pieces. The gun crews were shot down one by one until the 2 big guns fell silent. Colonel Benson was everywhere, a conspicuous figure on horseback, rallying his men. Wounded in the knee, he refused to leave, crawling along the firing line to encourage his soldiers. But his luck ran out. As he moved to help a wounded man, he was hit a second time, a mortal wound. With Benson down, the British defense collapsed. The heroic stand had lasted maybe 20 minutes. The defenders of the ridge were almost annihilated. The cost was horrific. Of 1 company of 40 Yorkshiremen, only 5 were unhurt. Of 79 men from the Scottish Horse, only 6. The ridge fell, and the Boers surged forward to seize the 2 guns. One ex-artilleryman in the Boer ranks even helped turn a captured gun on the distant British camp before its breech was removed. The rearguard had been destroyed, but their sacrifice had bought precious time for the main body of the column to form a defensive perimeter, preventing the Boers from rolling up the entire force. As darkness fell, the firing died down. The Boers, having won a stunning victory, looted the abandoned wagons for desperately needed weapons and equipment. Under the cover of darkness, British ambulance parties crept out to the corpse-strewn ridge. They worked through the night, bringing in the wounded, among them their dying commander. Colonel Benson gave his final orders before dying at 6 o'clock the next morning. The most effective column commander in the British Army was dead. The next morning revealed a scene of utter devastation. The short, sharp battle was one of the costliest small engagements of the war for the British. The casualty lists told a grim story. Approximately 87 British and Commonwealth soldiers were killed or died of their wounds, with another 182 wounded. The losses for the units in the rearguard were catastrophic. The names of the dead were a testament to the reach of the Empire. Englishmen, Scots, Irishmen, and Australians, all buried together on the remote South African veld. The Boer victory also came at a price. While their tactics were superb, they suffered around 14 men killed, including General Daniel Opperman, and 48 wounded. In the brutal calculus of guerrilla warfare, the loss of over 60 experienced fighters was a serious blow they could ill afford. News of the disaster at Bakenlaagte hit the British military command hard. Lord Kitchener, in Pretoria, was disheartened. In a letter, he admitted the effectiveness of the Boer tactics. The Boers observed the movements of a column from a long way off. Then, having chosen some advantage, in this case it was the weather, charge in with great boldness, and the result is a serious casualty list. The defeat of his best column commander was a personal and strategic blow. For the Boers, it was a desperately needed victory. Bakenlaagte proved that even after years of fighting, they could still inflict serious damage on the British. The victory, under the personal command of Louis Botha, galvanized their resistance in the eastern Transvaal. For the British, it was a humiliating setback. It brutally highlighted the vulnerability of their mobile columns, which were tied to slow-moving supply wagons. The death of Colonel Benson robbed them of one of their most innovative commanders, and his loss was keenly felt. It's worth noting that the story of Bakenlaagte was later used by some to fuel Afrikaner nationalism, perhaps overstating its strategic importance while downplaying the heavy losses the Boers suffered. It was a stunning tactical achievement, but it didn't change the war's final outcome. The British Empire's immense advantages in manpower and resources were simply too much to overcome. Yet, the Battle of Bakenlaagte endures. It was a clash of two military doctrines: the systematic, industrialized warfare of the British Empire against the fluid, unconventional tactics of the Boer commandos. It showcased the brilliance of Louis Botha as a strategist, able to strike at the perfect moment of his enemy's weakness. The battle is also a testament to the raw courage on both sides. The desperate, doomed defense of Gun Hill by the British rearguard entered the annals of their regiment's histories. The relentless, headlong charge of the Boer commandos into rifle and artillery fire showed a bravery born of desperation and a fierce love for their land. It was a brutal reminder that even in the twilight of the war, the fight was far from over. If you love military history like this, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories of forgotten battles and incredible acts of war. Let us know in the comments what other battles from the Anglo-Boer War you'd like to see covered. And for another look at this conflict, check out our video on the Siege of Mafeking. The Battle of Bakenlaagte was a tactical masterpiece for the Boers and a tragic, bloody lesson for the British. It demonstrated how the audacity and precision of Louis Botha's plan could shatter a symbol of British military efficiency in a matter of minutes. And while the war would ultimately end in a British victory, the devastating ambush at Bakenlaagte cemented its place in history as one of the most shocking and effective Boer triumphs of the entire conflict.